Hi, my name is Gia Dacayanan. For my thesis project, I decided to write a fantasy poetry collection inspired by what's called visionary fiction, which was coined by Black poet and scholar Willamette University, and she defines it as fantastical literature that helps us to understand existing power dynamics and helps us imagine paths to creating more just futures. And I really fell in love with this because I always thought that being a bigot is probably the most unoriginal and boring thing a person can be. I can't imagine what it's like to accept everything around you without a single question. There's nothing inspiring about it, nothing to love, there's nothing of them that I would want to keep because they're exactly what you expect them to be. There's just nothing about them that's exciting. And in contrast, visionary fiction has everything that I want to love and to keep, and it's how visionary fiction became the heart of my project. With all of that said, this collection I'd say is more of an attempt rather than a demonstration of visionary fiction. Not all poems ended up as hopeful as I'd like them to be, especially with COVID-19. It was also my first time trying to complete this many poems in such a short time. Sometimes it takes me like around 3 months to a year to complete even one poem. I'd mostly let it sit, or I call it like marinate in my head or my phone notes, and for the first 2 months until I forced myself to write it down for completion. And I do feel that most of these poems are still incomplete, even if they don't present themselves as such. So if you'd like to share your feedback, please don't hesitate to email me. I'll now read Points of Origin, which is the poem that this collection is named after. The title originated from my former academic advisor, actually, Professor Roy Perez, who would use the phrase origin points often as a teaching tool, and it always stuck with me. That's how I ended up using it. So if you're watching this, Professor Perez, thank you so much. Points of origin. To solve for loneliness, measure the distance between a house and fire. To find time, count the wrinkles at the center of your mother's chest. To find your mother, drink the free pouring light from the sky, sew leftover golden threads to the strands of your hair. A stone that drank light like you will appear, and you will hear a quiet voice murmuring, "There is more. There is always more." And now for this next piece, it doesn't have a title yet. It also takes me a really, really long time to give names to my things, and I'm still thinking about it. So if you have any recommendations, please let me know. But it's also one of the pieces that happens so quickly, and probably the poem I'm most satisfied with, ironically enough. It's a narration poem, and the original text was extracted from a published series of letters of a U.S. official's wife from the early 1900s, and I think the last letter was written in 1905, so a very long time ago. And it was around what the U.S. calls the Spanish-American War. The stars seem not as wonderful as the twinkle we call tomorrow. Certainly, our imagination will take enough. Don't you remember? A fleeting cathedral-filled sunlight on shore to make the walled city approach typhoons, coasting new life. And now for this next one, This poem was probably the hardest one to write because it deals with so many issues all at once. So if you or your parents are from colonized countries, I'm from the Philippines, canned goods are sort of a part of everyday life. And I got the idea to write this poem when I remembered Elaine Castillo's article titled Colonialism in a Can. And she also wrote this book called America is Not the Heart, and I highly recommend everyone to read it. And in her article, it talks about how canned goods date back all the way from U.S. military occupation, which is still happening today. And the title is also based off of this article, off of the title of this article, and I highly recommend everyone to read the article as well. A Tale for Canned Colonialism, after Elaine Castillo. There's a bounty on a missing head that was plucked before it withered. Its body lingers like a dead chicken, whose spirit is still stuck in its wings. The bulb of its hands blooms on days our village feast, and on days without, it salvages juices from cold canned sardines and tuna left over from the last war someone forgot 100 years ago. Or was it yesterday? Expiration dates were scratched out before some body could remember the last time its head was seen on a deluged boat, drowning in salt bubbles, whistling songs for fishermen to find schools of albacore, quicker than clean white ships. Now for this next one, the form for this poem was first inspired by Fatima Asghar's microaggression bingo in her poetry book titled If They Come For Us, and it's one of my favorite poetry books of all time, I think. I kind of made it impossible for anyone to get a bingo though, like through the form that I ended up making. I don't think I've reached an optimal format for this poem yet, just because I mix a bunch of lines up inside a tesseract, which is a fourth dimensional shape. So it's a cube connected to an inner cube, pretty much. The lines aren't meant to be read in any order as well. And I wrote this poem sort of to portray what it's like to feel out of touch with your body, what it's like for your body to be against the restrictions of time. And if you've ever astral projected, you'll know which lines talk about astral projecting. So this one's called Fourth Dimensional Bingo. Revived a flame from the faintest candle wick that had just been blown. Used it for warmth. Blinked twice. Watched a leaf unfurl. Free panic space. Saw yourself sleeping. Flew to another dream. Shot light out of your chest. Searched for light. Free panic space. Met an unknown relative. Met the thing you made when you were lonely. And now, this one's called A Poor Attempt at Memoir, and it's quite literal. I think it is a poor attempt at memoir. I lost someone very dear to me recently, so this is what came out of wanting to memorialize that person. And many parts of this piece are quite literal besides the title. The dream I talked about here is literal. I had it a couple weeks ago, and I did used to burn ants with a magnifying glass, so if you also used to do this, please let me know, because it would make me feel less weird about it. And it's also one of my most incomplete pieces, because it's my longest one, and I rarely write poems longer than a page. I don't think it's as cohesive as I want it to be yet. A poor attempt at memoir. Sometimes the day begins with not knowing what day it is, missing hands with veins that might resemble mine or my sister's. Sometimes daylight finally leaves, and I've run out of breath searching for palms, no longer tracing mine. Sometimes the day burns ants through a refracted droplet of light in a magnifying glass, witnessing for the first time a stranger lighting their cigarette with the arson leaf I left for the ants to live in. Sometimes the day begins with a dream. I am 8 again, my arms embrace a cob of corn at a hilltop. A breeze sweeps rice stalks as a stranger rows a boat mid-air to lead me home. The sky scolds sunflowers, the size of my grief, for feeding me with their indigo morning. I hold my arms out, forcing them to inhale the sun, pleading for another drought. Sometimes, all the luck runs from a dragonfly held till its torso ruptures, till the sun turns indigo. Sometimes I think infinity lives in time, but not the body. I am 22, and I've forgotten how I made a murderer out of the sun. And now for this final poem, I wrote when I was 16. I was in a social justice summer camp in downtown Portland. The prompt was write a poem that starts with I am from a body, and this is mostly what came out of it. I did do some recent heavy editing. I finally gave this poem a name after 6 years now. And it's after Mark Aguilar, who's a trans Filipino artist, activist, writer, who wrote Litanies to My Heavenly Brown Body. But one of the lines is a direct quote from one of her other works that says, "Who is worth my love, my strength, and my rage?" Most of my poems from when I was a teenager I burned when I was a first year in college, so this is the only one that survived, and I'm sort of glad that it did. This one's called Litanies to the Heavenly Brown Ancestors, after Mark Aguilar, 1987 to 2012. I am from bodies ascended from the ashes of arsoned huts, bodies pointed by guns and swords, beheaded bodies. I am from bodies once laced in gold, bodies with the hushed secrets of gold. I am from bodies rooted in ashen soil, bodies eternally chasing every peak of sunlight. I am from bodies bright and glittered, hilarious and bitter, bodies self-anointed beloved again and again. I am from happened bodies, have been happening bodies, bodies worth all the love, all the strength, and all the rage, bodies that will happen again and again and again. That was my final poem, and before I fully conclude, I'd like to thank Dr. Doolin and my fellow classmates who looked over my work, and my mentors from the past and present, my friends and family who listened and encouraged me to finish what I started. Thank you.